Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today I still have a little bit of, at the time of recording, a little bit of issues with my cold that I had recently. You'll have probably discovered that in the last couple of these diary videos that we covered, where I had a little bit of trouble talking at some points. My voice definitely sounded a little different, a lot more cuts, dealing with coughs. Probably going to have a lot more of the same of that this week, so I apologize ahead of time for that. But regardless of any of that, today is at last the 6th and final diary for Knife of Dreams, the 11th book in the Wheel of Time, where we're covering the last 100 pages of the book, basically, which amounts to chapters 31 through 37, plus the epilogue, which was all very good stuff, actually. You know, I talked about in last week's diary about how a couple of the plot lines got some pretty good climactic moments, and therefore, to some degree, some pretty good resolution following 5 books of this kind of arc just going on and meandering a little bit. And how I hoped for these last 100 pages to do basically the same thing with the couple outstanding major plot lines, and thankfully that was the case. So this week I spent just about 4 hours finishing the book, which put my total for Knife of Dreams at about 33 and a half hours reading, which is a lot, but overall I would say it was pretty good. The thing that caught my eye a little bit more than just the 33 and a half hours that I've spent reading Knife of Dreams, just getting through this book, is by the time I got to that point, it's just like, wow, I've read 11 of these books, plus New Spring. How much time have I actually spent reading The Wheel of Time at this point? And, well, reading all of Robert Jordan's output in the series, just kind of as a fun little statistic thing here at the start, I spent 370 hours reading The Wheel of Time over the last 2.5 years, which, you know, spread out over 2.5 years really isn't that much time at all. But when you consider that 370 hours is 15 full days, that's a lot of time to be spent reading one series and not even be done with it. For reference, that's like, even if I spent 12 whole hours doing nothing besides reading this series, it would take me an entire month to get through just the first 11 books plus New Spring, which is, like, absurd in my brain. This doesn't feel like a reasonable amount of time to have spent with how much I've gotten out of the series at this point, but you know, for spoiler-free impressions for just this last week's worth of reading in Knife of Dreams specifically, I can at least say that the time spent reading this book was largely worth it, because this week did continue that trend from the last couple weeks, where the back half of the book is a lot more solid, a lot more enjoyable, and frankly has a lot more stuff going on than the first half did, where the first half kind of meandered for a good portion of it, basically outside of the prologue and the first couple of chapters, basically, and a lot of the rest of it was just like, okay, can we get to the point already? And thankfully we continued to get to the point with these last couple of plot lines. So, like I said, we're going to be covering chapters 31 through 37 plus the epilogue here, and yeah, there was some exciting stuff. I believe chapters 31 through 33 plus chapter 35 are all to do with Elaine's plotline. So we're going to go ahead and cover those chapters first and get through some of that. And then, of course, we will cover chapter 34 and then 36 and 37. After that, finishing off Matt's plotline for the book, and then we'll do the epilogue at the very end. So, with Elaine and Matt's plotlines being the primary reasons why the first half of Knife of Dreams wasn't the most solid for me personally, that worried me a little bit coming into this final week's worth of reading, but thankfully those worries were assuaged by the actual content that was in here. So let's just jump into it. Let's actually begin in the spoiler content, chapters 31 through 33 plus 35 for Elaine's plotline. Chapter 31 sees Elaine getting a little bit more information of some stuff that is going on around Camelin, some stuff that we've had being built up throughout the rest of the book up to this point. One of those things is that there are more kin within Camelin being murdered somehow, because they're not all spending time grouped together in at least groups of 2, 24/7, like the way that Elaine basically is wanting to require them to be, because there's somebody around the area killing them. Presumably, Black Aja Aes Sedai is, I believe, probably the ongoing theory of what's going on there, which would also kind of check out a little bit with the theory about, obviously how Adeleas was murdered, like, what was that, like 4 books ago at this point, it feels like. So definitely a little bit of concerning stuff going on in here. At some point early on in the chapter, this is something that'll probably come back up a little bit more full force in the last act of the series, is that there is a red Aja Aes Sedai named Duhara, who comes from the White Tower to Caemlyn in the beginning of the chapter, basically to make herself an advisor for Elaine, since Andor has always been in such good, I guess, relationship, you could say, with the White Tower, generally speaking, but Elaine more or less refuses this advising from Duhara because, of course, Elaine doesn't support Elida. Elaine does not prop up Elida as the Amyrlin. Elaine supports Egwene's claim, as the Amyrlin, so there's a little bit of tension there. Elaine basically sends off Duhara to be taken care of elsewhere and else time, because there's no room in the palace for her, and she doesn't care to make room in the palace for her. So again, I think that this probable relationship, whatever's going to go on with Elaine and the advising of an Aes Sedai within Caemlyn, that's probably going to be something that we cover a little bit more in the last act of the series, is something that I presume to happen, not least because of some of the stuff that we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. In either case, that's some stuff that happens early on. We also get to mention that Elaine felt Rand was in deep pain for some reason. She's not sure what that pain was, what happened. Of course, we know it's because Rand just lost his left hand, but Elaine doesn't know that yet. She just knows that something hurt him very badly, so she wonders about that. But the bulk of this chapter comes after the moment when Halwyn Nori comes with, that former cut purse named Hark to announce that after a few days, Hark has followed and determined where it is that Mellar has been going, because of course Elaine did have this task set upon him within last week's reading. I can't remember for sure, but that was a task that was given to Hark. And it turns out that he is going to a house, the house on Full Moon Street. I guess there's a street in Caemlyn called Full Moon Street, and that's where the chapter title comes from. But Mellar goes to a house on Full Moon Street. Of course, we know that this house is where Cheyenne resides, and that there are at least two Black Aja sisters involved over there as well. Those being, I'm forgetting their names off the top of my head for some reason. Sisters that we've dealt with in the past, we shall say. And with this information, with this revelation, Elaine basically has enough evidence to suggest that, hey, yeah, Mellar's not a good guy. He's dealing with women who we know to be Black Aja for sure. So we're going to arrest him. And so she makes to have him arrested. She calls for that to happen. And then she also goes with the other Aes Sedai within Caemlyn, those being Vandene and Saritha and Carrion, to go to the house on Full Moon Street to basically confront Cheyenne and the couple of Black sisters that Mellar has been conversing with directly, and that is something that they go to do. They arrive there, and Elaine basically refuses for any of the warders to do anything. They're going to go in alone, which is a pretty dumb idea, but that's something that Elaine decides to have happen. She links with Saritha, and Vandene links with Carrion. This is a very important point. They link together and then hide their weaves so that they can go in and be able to overpower the Black Aja sisters pretty easily. And the reason that Vandene and Elaine do the linking specifically is because she's been able to determine that either Saritha or Carrion is the Black Aja sister, the one that's like kind of subverting everything that's going on here. Because, well, Vandene, given her grief over her sister's murder, is probably not the person who murdered her sister. So it's one of the other two that has to be the traitor here. And with Elaine leading her weave and Vandene leading her little link over there, the other two, if one of those two is Black Aja, they would not be able to use that and subvert the other for Black Aja purposes. So that's something that she has happen. They enter the house, and at first they do get the jump on a couple of the Black Sisters and Cheyenne in there, but then a handful more Black Aja emerge, who were just kind of there hanging out, and were unknown to Elaine and the rest of the party. Obviously, they incapacitate them instead. It is revealed in this moment that Carrie-Anne was the other Black Aja, therefore the one who murdered Adelaus. And in my mind, just theorizing, I think this is just a guess. I don't know if it's anything that's been confirmed. I'm guessing probably the one who's been murdering the kin in Camelin as well. And when Carrie-Anne is revealed to be the other Black Aja in here, it is Vandene who goes ahead and kills her, but then Vandene and Saritha are killed by some of the others. I'm not entirely sure 100% why Elaine wasn't just killed in this moment. I don't know if there's a passing detail in there that I missed. I was just like, okay, but why was she the one that wasn't killed in this moment? I don't remember if there's a specific reason as to why. I don't remember what that reason is, but for now I'll just go along with it. That's what happens. But then chapter 32 takes us to a Birgitta point of view, where she and the other warders outside of the house, while this is all happening, they get the sense of like unsteadiness that is going on with their Aes Sedai, of course, when they were kind of stunned by the other Black Sisters who emerged, and then the various other warders, all of the ones who aren't Birgitta, go berserk and start to charge the house in rage. That separation rage that happens when a warder's Aes Sedai dies. They just go crazy. And so they all go, and Birgitta has enough mind to decide not to do that, because confronting who knows how many Black Aja in there would not be very smart, no matter how much of their own army they have at the moment right now. So she decides to fall back, retreat with the rest of the people who are here, not knowing the extent of the opposition, like I said, and instead goes back to the palace so that she can meet with the General Gaibon and also some of the Windfinders to basically determine how to free Elaine, given that she's the only one that survived this encounter, basically. Back at the palace, Birgitta learns that there are several unsworn nobles within Andor that are heading toward the palace right now. At the same time, there's also numerous assaults that are commencing on various different points of the walls, where she determines that archers just kind of have to hold off all of those various assaults, and that's the best that she can do for them, because also at the same time as all of this, there's one of the gates of Camelin, the Formatting Gate, that is being assaulted by what's her name, Aramella's forces, like full brunt at the moment. At this point, she has to let Dylan go to secure that gate with some of the soldiers, but she basically makes to have everybody else go to try to save and free Elaine. And in order to free Elaine, she also meets with the Windfinders, the sea folk that are in Camelin, and basically has to convince them. It's just like, hey, we need to go save Elaine. And they're like, yeah, but this isn't part of the bargain, so we don't really want to. And Birgitta basically has to persuade them, that's the word that I'm looking for here, to say that if Elaine doesn't survive this, the bargain means nothing and you won't get anything, so you better help us and make a gateway or make a portal for us to travel through for this very large amount of our army, for General Gaibon's army, to be able to help free Elaine, so get on it. And so they do that. The Windfinders try to oppose being done with that, like I said, because it's not part of their bargain. But they do all link up, and the head of them allows them all to travel through. There's that kind of assault that's planned, and that takes off because Elaine has now been put into a wagon to be taken away by the various Black Aja sisters and whoever they have on their side as well, just trying to make a getaway. And an assault now a charge is being led upon all of them. Birgitta in this moment also has the head of the Athenian Mier, who are helping, I guess, at this point, come and watch basically everything happening because, you know, one of the Black Aja sisters has a Terran that can spit balefire, which just destroys a bunch of people. There's a bunch of other slaughter of a bunch of the army happening in this moment, and the Windfinder's just like, I don't really want to be watching this right now. Why am I watching this, Birgitta? And Birgitta's like, well, you see, if they are not stopped, Elaine is not safe, and therefore your bargain is useless, so you should probably intervene, because at this point now the Windfinders are the only people who have the power to be able to do anything, because the other Aes Sedai were killed, of course, in the previous chapter, and so the Windfinder finally decides, like, yeah, you're probably right, and so she takes out the Aes Sedai that is using the Terran that shoots balefire. She also basically incapacitates and shields and binds all of the other Aes Sedai and their other allies there, and this little moment is done. This little skirmish here is done. There are various soldiers that were slaughtered in the meantime, but the Windfinder was able to help save Elaine in this moment, and that is great. That takes us into chapter 33, which is back to Elaine's POV after being freed by Birgitta from the wagon. She sees that one of the Black Aja sisters that was taking her away is dead, but the rest of them are shielded. Everyone's been bound, of course, just like we witnessed at the end of the last chapter. She's going to have them all held in Caemlyn, I guess, until she can find whatever else it is that she needs to do to deal with them. She's just going to have them held, I believe, is the determination she came to. But in the meantime, Elaine's going to take everybody who came to help free her, help rescue her. She's going to take everybody to the Farmading Gate at Caemlyn to attack Aramilla's forces from behind, which they all do, of course, and after about a half hour of more slaughter, more battle, more skirmish, finally calls for quarter go up and are granted to the opposing forces. Aramilla and some of her more officially sworn supporters are captured. They aren't allowed the opportunity to swear otherwise because Elaine doesn't trust Aramilla in the first place for obvious reasons. And there's a certain type of swearing support that one can do within this, you know, whole political however things go in Andor when succession is going up and you need 10 houses support to be able to be made the ruling house of Andor. There is a particular way that you can swear support for another house that is basically binding, that you can't really take back and switch over to support to somebody else. So Aramilla and the other houses that have supported her in that way are captured, basically to be held for the time being as well, I guess. There's another house that had sworn support for Aramilla, but the head of that house died, purportedly from a seizure, but I'm not entirely sure that that's the case because this guy's granddaughter, you know, just kind of conveniently is just like, oh yeah, he died from a seizure, so I'm going to now be the leader. I am now the leader, the head of this house, and I now swear my support for Elaine, so that's nice. And then at some point, the unsworn houses that we were told earlier from Birgitta's point of view that were approaching Caemlyn, they arrive, and at least 2 of those unsworn houses, previously unsworn houses, swear as well in support for Elaine, getting her up to the 9 out of 10 houses required for her valid succession. So that's all really exciting stuff. And that takes us into chapter 35, which is titled The Importance of Dylan, and that is because Dylan is one of the other supporting, or ahead of another supporting ruling house in Andor, and she has some support from other people who have not up to this point sworn support for Elaine, even though Dylan has sworn support for Elaine, because Dylan's pretty certain that Elaine would make a much better queen than she would, which would be correct, but that is a concern that she has had. And so chapter 35 sees basically the completion of this arc here, where Elaine manages to actually make the succession, where before she had 9 out of the 10 houses required. This is the chapter where she actually gets the rest of them, because some of the other nobles are basically, they ask for safe conduct to be able to enter and leave Caemlyn as required, and Elaine does grant that, despite there being some political tension associated with it. But Elaine gives that to some of the other nobles under the pretense of needing to discuss, the nearby Borderlander army, which is, of course, something that she's been trying to use for the last couple books to, like, implicitly support her vying for the throne, because the Borderlander army, she knows what they're about. They basically... She's using them for her own support, basically, but none of the other houses know this, so there's political stuff going on there. The other nobles do meet with Elaine in Chapter 35. They learn that the Borderlanders are looking for Rand, amongst some other things, that Elaine basically permitted them to travel through Andor, which initially sparks a little bit of controversy, but she says, no, I used my authority as an Aes Sedai to approve this move, because there would have been no, actual ruler of Andor to really justify it. But anyway, during all of this political discussion and stuff that's going on, there are two more of the nobles here that do decide to back Elaine's cause, and the rest of them, as encouraged by Dylan to do the same. So now Elaine has a pretty solid support. She is basically now Queen of Andor. Her house now rules Andor again. That is all very good. She wins the throne, even though she's pretty hesitant about like half of her supporters being under pretty shaky support. But this is all really cool stuff. I'm really glad that this plotline also closed off. I can't say I'm as down on the Elaine plotline within like this arc of the series, I guess, as many other people have been that I've seen. But even so, it has been a little bit long-winded. I can understand why there are people who are just really not a fan, because Elaine has had, quite frankly, a ton of the word count of the last handful of books without really making a whole ton of progress in the plotline, so it is a little bit frustrating. I can understand it. So for this portion of the plot to finally basically be done here, and for us to be able to move forward with her actually as Queen of Andor, that'll be nice for the last act of the series. I'm glad for that. But that is going to take us to talking about chapters 34 and then 36 through 37, the last couple of Matt's plot line, even though half of what we're going to talk about here isn't even from Matt's POV. It's actually from Furyk Karrid's POV, who is, of course, of the Death Watch Guard, and is trying to locate Tuon, since Tuon's been kidnapped. Chapter 34 is a pretty short one. It basically is just a few pages of Furyk Karrid meeting with Shan-Shan camp to the north of Altara to learn about the attacks from Matt's group that we discussed in last week's reading, where Matt had an ambush against a Shan-Shan group that was like absolutely devastating for that Shan-Shan army that they ambushed. So Furyk Karrid hears tell of some of this going on, and is basically just trying to pin down the location of where Tuon could possibly be, and he follows these clues based off of what he learns in this chapter. He thinks that Tom Merrilin is the commander of the army. He doesn't know anything about Matt Cawthon, but in either case, it doesn't really matter that much, because Karrid is just trying to retrieve the kidnapped Tuon, while also avoiding letting others kill her, because he's pretty well aware that this big Shan-Shan group that he's talking to in this chapter, in chapter 34, that they're not, they don't respect the Death Watch Guard very much, and that there's a huge portion of the Shan-Shan that are basically being paid to try to kill Tuon, and this is a big part of what ends up happening in the next couple chapters as well. The first half of chapter 36 is also Karrid's POV, where he does, in fact, make it to the camp where Tuon is being held. He makes it to Matt's camp. He makes it to that group of people. He's allowed to enter with a handful of other people. He asks after Tom Merrilin, because, again, he thinks that Tom is the commander of the army. He witnesses people like Mistress Anon in the camp. He sees Eggian in there. He sees Amathera there. He thinks about all of this, assuming that the plot to kidnap Tuon was a White Tower plot, so he's like kind of curious as to how deep the White Tower plot goes, given that there are these other people that he knows from Ebu Dar and the Shan-Shan, like Eggian, of course. It's just like, why are all of these people here amongst this group? This White Tower plot goes deep, doesn't it? But it turns it's not a White Tower plot at all. It's just he doesn't fully understand everything that's going on. But, after noticing some of these people, the freed Aes Sedai that are around here, they arrive one of Khareed's group that was allowed to enter is a Damani by the name of Mylan, who was previously Aes Sedai, of course. The freed Aes Sedai who show up try to, make protests that Mylan should be freed, but Mylan shields all of them. Mat arrives and basically chastises Mylan for it. It's just like, no, you're going to release them now. And instead, Mylan tries to use the power against Mat, but because of that medallion that Mat has, even though Khareed doesn't know about the medallion, of course, we as the readers do. We know what's happening here, even if Khareed doesn't fully. Mylan and everybody else is pretty surprised that trying to use the power against Mat doesn't work, and he's just like, yeah, that's not going to work on me. Release them, and I will know when they're released. And so Mylan does release them, and then some of the others try to grab onto the power, and Mat's just like, no, you're not going to hold on to the power right now either. You stop that. It's just a very kind of funny interaction that occurs in this chapter. I thought it was actually pretty amusing. But generally speaking, Mat does reprimand them. He demands that none of them channel. And so at this point is when Khareed decides to finally address Tom as the general of the, band of the Red Hand here, saying and lying about his own forces, saying that he has like 10,000 people here to just try to get Tuon back, and that if Tuon is handed over to him, nothing will happen to Mat or his army or anything like that. And then, Tom obviously turns the conversation over to Mat. It's just like, you have the wrong guy. Mat over here is the actual general. And Mat, replies basically saying that he knows better, that he knows that the Death Watch Guard doesn't have that many people. His scouts have revealed that that's not what's going on, that's not the truth, but that if Tuon trusts the Death Watch Guard, that if Tuon trusts Khareed specifically, which she says she does, because she's here too, Mat determines that he's going to let her go with Khareed to return to Abu Dar. And that's the agreement that is made. It's just like, okay, yeah, you're going to be able to go with him, because Mat up to this point had promised to Tuon that he would find basically the soonest moment to allow her to return to Abu Dar whenever it would be safe for her to do so, and this is the time when that happens, and so he lets that happen. And Tuon, at the end of this chapter, does actually complete the marriage ceremony by declaring Mat as her husband 3 times. So now Mat and Tuon are actually husband and wife. So that's cool. That's been since the end of A Crown of Swords when Mat initially did that. So that's interesting. And there's a little bit of conversation here as we switch over to Mat's POV for the end of the chapter, where Mat kind of questions this, just like, okay, why did you decide to do this now? And he also mentions once again that he knew it would happen, but he wants to know why she would do it now. And Tuon questions what he means by, like, how did you know that I would eventually decide to do this? And Mat was just like, well, I went through Terran and I met the Elfin and Eelfin, and they told me that I would marry the daughter of the Nine Moons because everything they say is true. And he gets like sort of quasi confirmation from one of the Aes Sedai, just like, I've heard tell of these Finn, and that the things they say are truthful. There are Terran that can go to these places, so Mat might be telling the truth. Tuon doesn't believe it. She thinks he's lying, but Tuon does answer his question, and basically responds that she had heard a foretelling from a Damani previously that gave her warning of a person that she would marry, basically with like 3 different tales of the person that she would marry, and Mat had completed all 3 of them at this point, and she was like, okay, well, I guess that means that I'm going to do the good for the Empire, and with this foretelling knowledge that I have, I'm going to complete the ceremony. So now they're married. That's all well and good, and after all of this happens, we also get word of a Shan-Chan army coming for Tuon, with a very big bounty for Tuon's head, basically, to which Mat decides that, like, hey, you're going to go with Khareed, you're swiftly going to disappear, and Mat's going to borrow a small portion of the Death Watch Guard to help kind of lead the Shan-Chan group that's approaching away to be led into a trap elsewhere. And that's what chapter 37 is about, where Mat and the Death Watch Guard, the small group that he has with him, they kind of await for their forces with for Vannon to arrive with the primary Shanshan forces following him as, kind of leading into this trap, where eventually they do come and the battle commences, and this battle was actually pretty enjoyable to read. There are some of these big epic moments that Robert Jordan writes that are actually enjoyable to read. Thankfully, all the climactic sequences of Knife of Dreams were actually of the better sort, that were actually enjoyable to get through. Whereas I've been pretty disappointed by some of his climaxes in the past, things like Winter's Heart and Path of Daggers. Both climaxes in those two books disappointed me a lot. All of the various climaxes in Knife of Dreams definitely satisfied me a little bit more. This chapter was one of those cases. You have another sequence kind of like what we talked about last week, where the crossbowmen just kind of do a huge bulk of damage to the opposing army in this book. Aes Sedai join a little bit near the end of it. But it turns out that the monetary reward, that bounty for Tuon's head, was a little bit too much, and none of the Shanshan tried to escape. They all wanted to get that bounty, and so they all died, commencing this assault. So, yeah, that's what happens in that chapter. And, one of the Death Watch Guard that is with Matt keeps addressing Matt as Highness throughout the chapter, which is noted particularly, and then at the very end, Matt's just like, please stop calling me Highness, call me Matt, I'm not a nobleman, I don't like noble people. But then the Death Watch Guard guy's just like, yeah, but you're married to Tuon, who's the daughter of the Nine Moons, your Highness, like that's just how this works now. And he's like, okay. He laughs himself to pieces at the very end of the chapter, the closing lines of the chapter, realizing that even though he hates nobility, he is now nobility. So that's funny. Yeah, that's the end of that section, and leads us into the epilogue, which the first half of the epilogue anyway actually kind of continues that storyline a little bit. But indirectly, and also, from a different location, because it is Suroth's POV in Ebu Dar now, where she awaits word of Tuon's death. This entire time, she's been part of the reason for the plot for Tuon to die, because she is going to make herself the Empress, basically, because Semirhage has assassinated all these people, and she wants to be the one to be raised up, but because Tuon's in the way, she needs Tuon to die, and she's waiting for word of Tuon's death, only for instead Tuon to arrive with the Death Watch Guard in Ebu Dar in the epilogue here, personally asserting, with proof, that Suroth's most obedient man, I forget his name, but a servant of hers who does not do anything unless it's by her word. This man tried to kill Tuon, and so his head is laid before them, and Tuon's basically just like, yeah, this deed is not going to go unpunished. The fact that he tried to do this very heavily suggests, if not basically proves in and of itself, that you tried to kill me, Suroth. And so Suroth is no longer of the blood. She's taken down from that mount, and is instead made into a slave herself, who will be sold after a certain length of time. So yes, my how the mighty have fallen. It's fantastic. Honestly, kind of an epic moment. I would have not been mad if the book ended there, but there is one last scene in the epilogue. I think that makes this the longest epilogue in the series up to this point, if I'm not mistaken. It's like 10 pages. But the second scene of the epilogue here features a half dozen Red Aja Aes Sedai arriving at the Black Tower to go try to meet with Mazrim Taim about bonding Ashaman, as per what they assert is like some new rules in the White Tower about Red Aja, because, Time questions this a little bit. It's just like, yeah, Red Aja trying to bond men, what is this? And so the Red Aja tries to search, like, hey, we know the most about men who can channel, because we're basically the ones who have in the past historically tried to capture them and so gentle them. But now we're determining that Red Aja can bond men as warders, because up to this point, Red Aja, not being fans of men, have not really bonded any warders. So they're like, now we can bond men, but only men who can channel, because we know the most about men who can channel. It's a really weird kind of argument that they try to make here, but Taim seems to accept it. He accepts the proposal, seemingly a little bit too willingly, especially as he asserts a little line of dialogue about letting the Lord of Chaos rule, which struck me very off guard. isn't the Lord of Chaos, let the Lord of Chaos rule line something that has only been said in Forsaken circles? Is that something that has been said anywhere elsewhere? Is Taim Forsaken? I don't know. I don't know if any of the Forsaken off the top of my head could possibly be Taim this whole time. So it's even if he's not Forsaken, I definitely know that he's up to some shady business now, that he's probably has dealings with the Dark One to some degree. I mean, we could probably assume that he was probably the one behind the attack on Rand that happened at whenever it was. Was that at the end of Path of Daggers, or was that at the end of A Crown of Swords? I forget whenever it was that attempted assassination by Samashaman in Carrion happened. I think it's pretty safe to assume that Taim was probably behind that to some degree. There's also the fact of him having his own little faction of Ashaman at the Black Tower. People were sworn to him personally and not to Rand, that we heard about from Logain a little bit earlier. The fact that Logain seems very suspicious of Taim for other reasons as well. I'm pretty heavily suspecting now that Taim is just a bad dude, and that he's probably playing in the hands of Forsaken, even if he is not one, because that Lord of Chaos line is a little bit too on the nose to end this book. But that is everything. That is everything in Knife of Dreams. That is the end of the book. That is the end of the Wheel of Time Diaries until next February, probably, when I'll be going through and starting to read the last few books basically back to back. So yeah, that was all very cool. I gotta say, just as a little bit to wrap this whole thing up, kind of my impressions of Knife of Dreams as a whole. The prologue was pretty great. Overall, the first few chapters were also pretty great, kind of dealing with the White Tower type of plotline that was going on. Because, quite frankly, what I realized while reading this book is that part of the reason why I haven't enjoyed the last handful of books as much is because of the White Tower, the Egwene, and Egwene adjacent type of stuff hasn't been on the page very much, and I've wanted a little bit more of that, I guess, and there hasn't been a whole ton of it. So I've been missing that. So it turned out that the very beginning of this book was really solid because it had a lot of that. But then most of the rest of the first half kind of meandered a little bit, was basically more of the same as the last few books. I was just like, okay, can we get on with it? Can we get on to the point? Can we, like, do this a little bit more efficiently? That type of thing. But the back half was really good. The argument that I kind of talked about this a little bit last week. Would I say that Knife of Dreams is a return to form for Robert Jordan or for the series? I would say that's still a little bit more debatable, all things considered, just because there is, the length of the book and the fact that a lot of the first half didn't really do a whole lot for me. It's hard to say it's a return to form technically. And then there's also the fact that a lot of the reason why this feels like a return to form is because Robert Jordan actually decided to have climaxes for these plot lines and actually put these all of these plot lines that have been going on for 5 books at this point in places where they're ready to go into the last act of the series. It's less a return to form and more Robert Jordan finally realizing that he was losing the plot himself for the last few books and that he needed to get things back on track. So you could say that that's a return to form it's to some degree, in some way, right? But again, the fact that a lot of the first half of this book was a little bit less exciting to me makes it hard to assert that it truly was a return to form and was more just Robert Jordan correcting the mistakes that he had been making for multiple books in a row at this point. So, that's probably going to be a little bit more of a hot take, I think. But even so, that is just kind of where I landed with Knife of Dreams for now. If you want a little bit more on that, I believe it will be next Tuesday at the time of this video's release that my spoiler-free review for Knife of Dreams will go up, and I'll talk about a lot of this a little bit more fully. And yeah, that's where I'll go ahead and leave today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you happen to be somebody who's stuck around with a large majority of the Wheel of Time Diaries, I really appreciate all of you for sticking around with my journey. I know it's taken about 2.5 years just to get up to this point. Alas, we still have another half year to go, but by May of 2026, I should probably be done with the series, hopefully. We'll see. That's definitely the goal. But in either case, for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.